helping us with this forum and getting through what is sure to be a great dialogue and debate. So with that, I'll hand it off to Julio from South Central Brooklyn United for Progress to talk about his club.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Julio Peña III. My pronouns are he, him, or they. I am an ex officio member of South Central Brooklyn United for Progress and a founding member. We are a group and organization in South Central Brooklyn, originally called NYSD 17 for Progress. And we focus on advocacy and policy issues in South Central Brooklyn. And we're super excited to be partnering here and to really talk about the issues in this new New York 10 district for which I am a resident of, and really excited to elevate the issues, particularly for communities like mine in Sunset Park and Red Hook, and super excited to hear from the candidates on their issues to help our neighborhoods. And I'm going to pass it to, I don't know which one of my colleagues next, but I'm gonna pass it to the next person. Thank you, everyone, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Hunter Rabinowitz. I'm the president of the Brooklyn Young Democrats. We are a borough-wide Democratic organization focused on advocating for issues that are important to young people in Brooklyn and campaigning for candidates who will help forward those issues for young people in Brooklyn. We're really excited to be part of this event tonight. Obviously, New York 10 is one of the most important and looked at races throughout all of New York State, if not the whole country. And it's so exciting that so much of that race is happening right here in Brooklyn. Many of our members come from the parts of the district that are in New York 10. And of course, young people are a very big part of the Democratic base, and helping, focusing on issues that are important to young people are going to help candidates throughout Brooklyn, throughout New York, and throughout the country win elections. So we are really excited to hear what the candidates today have to say and how they're going to forward a progressive agenda. So with that, I'm going to introduce Derek Gaskill from Lambda Independent Democrats.
Hey everyone, my name is Derek Gaskill. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the co-president of Lambda Independent Democrats, LID. We are Brooklyn's only LGBTQ political club, and we strive to see LGBTQ candidates and pro-equality candidates represented at all levels of government. My co-president, Nick Tambora, couldn't be here today, but sends his regards. And also, I'm going to introduce Equality New York, who is also a sponsor of this event, but also cannot be here today. Equality New York is a statewide advocacy organization working to advance equality and justice for LGBTQIA New Yorkers and their families. So Equality New York and LID are excited to team up for this event to make sure that whoever represents Brooklyn and Manhattan are pro-LGBTQ or LGBTQ themselves. So with that, are we starting this? All right, I'll introduce Ben Max.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm Ben Max, editor of Gotham Gazette. You can find us at gothamgazette.com. I think let's have our candidates come on up who are here for the first panel, and I'll briefly introduce you once you're up here. Just so everybody here is ready and aware, we've got a first panel of candidates that we're going to start momentarily with some introductory and opening statements, and then we will they will field questions from me that have been submitted through the clubs that are hosting. So these are from the host clubs and online solicitations that they got. They've been crafted by a group of people, and I've put some finishing touches on them, but they're really from the host groups and other interested parties. Candidates, when we get into the question and answer time, just be ready. I might ask you for a quick follow-up. If I don't think you've answered the question or you've been vague, I might say, okay, but the question was, or something along those lines, and just be ready for a quick additional response if needed, please. This panel will be for the next hour, and then we've got a second panel coming up after this of other candidates. As you know, it's a nice, big, accomplished, competitive field here. So away we go momentarily here. Let me introduce the candidates, starting here from my left and going down the aisle. I also did want to quickly say that if anybody has additional questions, I don't know, I think there's still an online form you could submit, and they're trying to send me one or two, but we're pretty stock full of questions at this point. If you want to catch the candidates or campaigns, at another time, they're all over Brooklyn campaigning and so forth, but I don't think we're going to take audience questions here. Candidates, you're going to start with a couple of minutes opening statement and remarks, and then we'll get into questions. So right here we have Jimmy Lee, Brian Robinson, Mondaire Jones, and Quanda Francis. So welcome to this group of candidates. So why don't we start in that same order with 2-minute opening statements? Jimmy, please step up to the mic and go ahead. Do we have a timekeeper right here? Okay, they're going to give you the 30-second warning. We're going to do 2-minute opening statements.
All right. Hi, good evening. My name is Jimmy Lee. I was a certified teacher. I'm not a career politician. I'm an everyday New Yorker and a community advocate who live in District 10 for most of my life. I know the district and the community very well. Our district is overdeveloped, and people no longer feel safe when they are on the street or taking the subway. So including myself, and I'm taking the train to go to work every day and use public transportation to travel around the city. So I co-founded New York City Asian American Democratic Club, and I'm the current president for the club. And I'm also the co-founder for Asian American Community Empowerment, and that's a nonprofit coalition of Asian American organizations that consists of 60 member organizations nationwide. So as a community leader for more than 10 years, I work closely with other community leaders and allies to work on issues like API hate, DACA, housing, education, and other important to empowering people for social change and social equality. And if I do become your congressional District 10 representative, I will focus on affordable housing and immigration, affordable housing solution, immigration, and infrastructure job creation. Thank you all. Nice seeing you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Robinson.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. First of all, I'm a little bit confused, but strangely feel very welcome with the menorah in the corner. As a Jewish guy, I appreciate that. Very inclusive. So right now, this country is at a breaking point, and there's no civility anymore. It just feels like the polarizations in each party are tearing us apart, and the tension in the center is going to snap. And my fear is that at some point, we're going to wish that we came to the table in good faith to try to reach some mutual ground, because at some point it will get much worse. And really bringing civility back to Washington, D.C. is something that's very important to me. And it's important because I have a 4-year-old daughter, and right now this country is not in a state where I'm comfortable raising her. And that goes as an extension for all children. Right now, public safety is a huge issue. If you read the news lately, there was a story about how my wife and my daughter were followed in the hallway. That was a scary incident. January 6th was a scary incident. It shows where we are to state of our country. Public safety, green space, and small business empowerment. I was a small business owner for over 12 years. I wrote a book about ADHD, so I'm also a mental health advocate, which is extremely I think important right now because we're facing a mental health crisis. In terms of homelessness, I think we need to find a compassionate but better solution. And I want to bring federal oversight to the homeless industry complex, because right now they're not doing a service for the homelessness. the homeless population or the neighborhoods in which they reside. Many are linked to violent incidents, and I'm happy to elaborate on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mondaire Jones.
Well, let me start by thanking all of you for being here on what I'm sure is a very busy evening for all of you. And I want to also thank the co-hosts who organized tonight's event. This is a very important race. Those of you who know my story know that unlike most of the people we're used to seeing in our politics, I don't come from money or from a political family. When I ran for Congress in 2020, I ran because for me, policy is personal. I grew up in Section 8 housing and on food stamps. And I was raised by a young single mom who, like so many incredible women throughout this district and throughout this country, still had to work multiple jobs just to provide for our family. When I made history back in 2020 as our nation's first openly gay Black member of Congress, that was something that very few people, if anyone, could have predicted based on the circumstances of my birth. And I have been a progressive champion in the time that I have been in the United States Congress. And I've been fighting for the communities that comprise this beautifully diverse district. For me, housing insecurity is personal. It's why I played a leading role at a time when few people thought we could get the House version of Build Back Better passed last fall through the House, in making sure that we did that and included tens of billions of dollars for NYCHA and a lot of money to create 300,000 additional Section 8 housing vouchers. We also have to make sure that we are fighting to end the climate crisis. This is personal to me as someone who's going to inherit a planet that will be devastated by climate catastrophe, like so many people in this room tonight, because people in Washington have failed to act with the urgency that that issue requires. It's why I've been a Green New Deal champion. It's why I introduced the Fossil Free Finance Act. And it's why after having negotiated passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, bringing billions of dollars to New York City, I'm going to be fighting to bring as many millions of those dollars to fund the resiliency projects throughout this district, whether it's in Lower Manhattan or to repair the BQE. I've also been leading the fight to end gun violence in America to the point where Tucker Carlson has attacked me on his show, which I view as a badge of honor. And of course, I'm going to keep fighting to bring money to our public schools. I was so upset to see this New York City Council budget cut funding for our public schools after I helped pass the American Rescue Plan, which brought billions of dollars to New York City public schools, in addition to having funded our small businesses and vaccinated a nation in the midst of a deadly pandemic. Thanks so much, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions tonight.
Thank you. Quanda Francis.
Hello, I'd like to first say thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Quanda Francis. I like to think of myself as a daughter of New York. I was born, raised, and educated in New York 10, slipped through the cracks in New York 10, was 17 and pregnant and homeless by 17. And the reason why that is so devastating, because I was a brilliant student. And now I am educating, my children are being educated in New York 10. My son is here with me in the audience. He's 9, he's in school in Battery Park City. I have a senior that is 18 years old, but she's a senior in college. So we have so many great things that are going well with New York City, but my entry into politics started when I worked for the NYPD, and I was denied promotion based on my race and my gender. And I wrote to every politician that represented me and everyone that I thought that would listen, and no one did. And that's when, again, my political journey started. I decided that I was not going to be the sort of elected official that would ignore the needs of the constituents. I have been on the ground. I recently ran for mayor in New York State Comptroller. I've had an opportunity to travel this state and speak to amazing people that understand what's at stake here. We cannot afford to send another politician to Washington that are going to ignore the needs of the people. So I come to you as my most authentic self. And again, thank you for having me.
So I'm gonna change up who starts each round, but we'll go in that same order every time. So why don't we start this time with Brian Robinson. In just 2 minutes each, you're not going to get into all the details of the legislation, but in 2 minutes each, what are 3 bills that you either sign on to sponsor or introduce in your first term in Congress if you're elected? 3 bills that you'll either sign on as a sponsor or introduce.
So number 1 would be federal oversight, federal regulation of the homeless shelters, which are not working for New York City. Right now, you have 17% of the homeless population that is severely mentally ill. These are statistics that are not something that's just coming out of my head. I've discussed this with experts in the field, including many psychiatrists who pay a lot of attention to this. And we need to protect the homeless populations inside the shelters, as well as the neighborhoods in which the shelters reside, in order to make sure that those who are in the shelters feel safe and have a place of sanctuary, and those who live in neighborhoods who have perhaps been victimized by violence that has come out of the shelters, particularly Chinatown.
I don't want you to lose all your time, so give us two more.
I want to do a resiliency bill. It's a landmark coastal resiliency bill that demands community input before any resiliency products or projects, I should say, are implemented, because that has been a failure in the East River Park, and now they're trying to get at Wagner. And lastly, as a small business advocate, I want to lower federal taxes exclusively for small businesses. They've had a very hard time and they're still struggling. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mondaire Jones, please.
Thanks so much. And if you don't mind, I'll talk about three bills that I happen to already be affiliated with. The first is my bill called the Judiciary Act of 2021, which would add 4 seats to the United States Supreme Court. More than a year ago, long before we saw Justice Alito's draft opinion in the Dobbs matter, purporting to overturn Roe v. Wade to take away that fundamental constitutional right, I knew that we would find ourselves in this moment. And even though my colleagues at the time scoffed at me, I introduced that legislation with Jerry Nadler and Hank Johnson, and the American people are on our side. We have to take back control of our destiny, of our democracy, of our fundamental rights in this country. And we see a far-right 6-3 conservative majority that is hostile to democracy itself and to rights that are not just abortion, but also, if you look at Justice Thomas's concurring opinion, the right to contraception and non-procreative intimacy and marriage equality and so much more. We have to keep building that movement. And I've been a thought leader. I've been the thought leader, in fact, on this subject. I'm also really proud to co-sponsor and will continue to push, if I'm fortunate enough to be reelected to Congress, the Medicare for All Act. Healthcare is a human right, hard stop. And the only policy that would ensure that that principle is enacted into law is to enact a single payer Medicare for all policy, like what I already co-sponsor in the United States Congress. It should not depend on whether you are employed or how much money you have in your pocket, that you have life-saving, high-quality medical care. And finally, I'm going to continue to co-sponsor the Green New Deal. We have to save the planet from climate catastrophe and create millions of good-paying jobs in the process, with an equity lens that looks at environmental justice communities, including communities right here in New York's 10th Congressional District, like in Red Hook and in Sunset Park. That is my commitment to you. I'm going to keep pushing all these issues.
Before you sit down, it doesn't have to be a full-fledged idea, but give us one thing that you're looking at new legislation on.
Absolutely. So as we speak, I've circulated a letter to my colleagues. AOC is on this letter as well with me. We're leading this letter together to amend statutes and to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. A lot of folks don't know that most cases that the court decides is because Congress has specifically legislated jurisdiction to it. The Constitution is largely silent on most of the matters that appear before the Supreme Court of the United States. So when we pass, again, the Women's Health Protection Act, which we'll do later this week, I'm proud to be on the cusp of voting for that for a second time this term, and other legislation that we need to be looking at that.
Thank you. Quanda Francis.
So K through 12 education, my platform has always been dedicated to the youth. We have a situation where our most valuable resources are not being educated to their fullest potential. And I've talked about introducing artificial intelligence and machine learning into the K through 12 curriculum to identify student learning styles. And that has caught the attention of world leaders. I was just recently invited to Monaco to discuss this idea of utilizing technology to identify student learning styles. And The second part of legislation would be accountability. I ran for New York State Comptroller because I feel like we don't have these measures in place to ensure that our tax dollars are being spent effectively and efficiently. And we can't have conversations about budget justice without ignoring these very vital roles, the Office of Controller, the fact that we have congressmen that are, and congresswomen that know that there are egregious violations of federal law, whether it be employment discrimination, and just don't have any measure in place to ensure that these practices don't continue. And then, as far as my third would be workforce development. Again, we have those valuable resources are not being trained. And when we think about the rise in gun violence, when we think about all of these issues that are going on in the communities, they're interconnected. And when we start giving people opportunities, research has shown, and by the way, a PhD background, NYU graduate, research has shown that if we make proper investments in workforce development, we will see the effects of that in terms of reduced crime, increased home ownership, and just real access to the American dream that we all want so
Thank you.
desperately.
Jimmy Lee?
Right. So I want to focus on three areas: legislations that will provide affordable housing solutions, and immigration, as well as the infrastructure job creation. So I will support You Bet Better to bring in more like good paying quality union jobs. And also we need to invest heavily in our aging infrastructure in New York City. So when Sandy, came, it caused massive damage to New York City waterfront communities. And 10 years later, we need to ask ourselves, are we ready for another, Sandy? So I don't think we are ready. So we need to, Build Back Better to invest in our subway system and highways and a lot of, infrastructure and also the coastal protection. So we need to invest more in our infrastructures. So for immigration, we need to provide a pathway for our like DACA, undocumented immigrants. So this country was built by immigrants, and documented or undocumented, have been a vital part of our economy. So we need to provide a pathway for all Americans, for all immigrants, documented or undocumented, to become citizens. So the third one will be affordable housing, right? So we have a housing shortage problem, right? And we need to revisit and like the past program that work well to address housing shortage problem, such as Michelama programs and sweat equity program in the 70s. So to study and then to bring back some programs that the government can partner together with unions and progressive private sector to bring more like affordable options for New Yorkers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You actually are getting us into our next question, which is about affordable housing in this district. But before we go into that question, just very quickly, what is one area of federal funding you would look to significantly increase to benefit this district directly? Just name one area, please. Go ahead, Quanda. Why don't we come down this way? One area of federal funding that you would look to increase in Congress that would directly benefit this district.
Climate, it's a coastal area. I work for the federal government as an emergency manager.
Thank you. That's good. Climate. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Jones.
The federal government is the only institution wherewithal to provide the level of funding required to clear the Section 8 housing investments.
We're coming back to housing in a second. Mr. Robinson.
Funding to expand green space, more parks. That helps fight against climate change. It's also great for kids, the elderly. Everybody enjoys parks. It's for quality of life, and it helps with mental health.
Mr. Lee.
Funding for NYCHA. So we need to repair NYCHA once for all, right?
All right.
And also funding for Section 8 and as well as the housing voucher.
Thank you. Go ahead, pass that mic down to Mondaire Jones, who's going to start this round. What will you do specifically in Congress to make it easier to build housing in this district, to build housing? Go ahead.
So I greatly appreciate the question. The main obstacle to building new, deeply affordable housing, rather than some out of touch person or agency's definition of what affordability should be defined as in this country, is the lack of financial investment. We are facing a crisis of underinvestment when it comes to housing in Lower Manhattan and in Brooklyn. It is a travesty. I've already mentioned how personal this is for me as someone who experienced housing insecurity growing up. I got to tell you, when I'm walking through Red Hook houses or Campos Plaza in Lower Manhattan, and I'm speaking to residents there as I've done, it is heartbreaking to hear their experiences and frankly, to see some of the conditions in which our neighbors, our brothers and sisters, and our loved ones are living. No one should have to experience that in the richest nation in the history of the world. It's why I was so proud to play a leading role in getting Build Back Better passed through the House. Tens of billions of dollars for NYCHA, many millions of dollars to create hundreds of thousands of additional Section 8 housing vouchers, and yet that still does not go far enough. Not just because we haven't gotten it through the Senate because of Joe Manchin, but also because we need to be investing even more money than that. It's why I co-sponsor the Homes for All Act, which would invest at the level required to create 9.5 additional affordable housing units throughout this country, including many thousands of units right here in New York's 10th Congressional District. I will not stop fighting for this. This is personal for me. And it is a travesty. It is a moral stain on this country and on the city, frankly, that we have not adequately invested. Meanwhile, we're increasing the NYPD budget, cutting money for our public schools. I speak to my neighbors in Carroll Gardens, and people are pissed. People are really pissed at the lack of prioritization of issues that really, really matter to people in this district. Thank you.
Thank you. Quanda Francis, well, you can just pass the mic to, we can move that mic around now.
Sorry.
Yeah. Here, why don't you two share that mic? Why don't you two grab this one and you can use it as you see fit, standing or sitting.
Okay. So I've talked about a radical idea of ending homelessness for 20,000 New Yorkers. We have companies that have utilized technology to build very tiny homes. Ian Musk lives in one for $50,000. We have a lot of NYCHA residents, if given the opportunity, they would move. And if we gave them the opportunity to own one of those homes and relocate them, by the way, these homes can be built in 2 weeks or less. Now we've solved a couple of problems, right? We've created affordable housing. We've given them an opportunity to live in a home with dignity. We've created home ownership, and now we've eased the sort of congestion that we see in terms of overcrowding and a lot of these apartments. We have in Red Hook, we have some apartments where there are 13 to 14 people that occupy one resident. And you only know that when you're on the ground and you're speaking to people. So again, with $1 billion, we can initially end homelessness for 20,000 New Yorkers. New York 10 is a very, very diverse district. But what we do see in terms of the marginalized communities in this area is that their voices are not being heard. They're living in deplorable conditions. And it's been that way for a long time. It's not enough to just keep saying, fund NYCHA, fund NYCHA, fund NYCHA, fund NYCHA. It's not enough. That's not good enough anymore. We need progress. We need leaders that are going to come in, that are going to look at the research, if the research is not there, gather a team of PhDs together and say, hey, I need information on how to best solve this problem. And we don't have that. We have these sort of Band-Aid solutions. So now it's like every 2 years, every 4 years, we're regurgitating the same issues. With education, they're talking about the same things in terms of a lack of access that we were talking about 200 years ago. So again, we can't continue down this path. So.
Thank you. Jimmy Lee, housing in the district getting built. Go ahead.
Sure. I think to address the housing shortage problem, also one thing we can also learn. All right, stand up. Oh, sorry. So one thing we can learn is also to learn how other countries address how they solve their problem, right? For instance, in Singapore, right? they allow low-income families to buy government-funded projects. So that's one way to combat like housing shortage and also homelessness, right? So New York City has a lot of money. We spend billions of dollars on housing and homelessness and also the mental health crisis. But the problem is, I think other candidates also mentioned, we have to be smart with spending. How we spend our public dollar is very important. So we need to do that and also bring more resources from federal government to revamp and also repair NY10 once for all, because a lot of conditions in NY10 buildings are totally unacceptable. I have been working citywide NY10 buildings for the past 8 years. I have seen a lot of like conditions in NY10 buildings, which I think besides funding, also we have to be smart with our how we spend those monies and hold those content accountable, right? So and also we have to go back to visit some programs that was in like 70s, right? Sweat equity program, right? And Michelema programs that really work well to address housing shortage problem. So maybe we can revisit that and then bring back those programs to help us to solve this problem.
Thank you. Brian Robinson.
So I think this is an issue that is often paid lip service to, but every 2 years or every election cycle, the same question is asked and not much has been accomplished. I would approach it in 3 different ways. One, from a market perspective, just pure economics. The more we build, the more there is a supply, the lower the prices will go. That's number one. Number two, NYCHA, the funding will be there. As a congressman, the funding will be there. But we have to make sure that the funding is allocated intelligently. Right now, NYCHA has a reputation for being the worst landlord in the city, and that has to stop. From what I understand, 90% of NYCHA funding goes to a consultant fee. And if you can correct me on that, I would love to be corrected, but from my sources, that is correct. And the third is empower community boards to deal with developers in a way that they can speak the language of tougher negotiation. Because a lot of times developers will look to take advantage of communities when they want to build, let's say, their next high rise, and they don't get enough in return for these developments that have already been agreed upon. So more affordable housing units within these sky rises, I think with the empowerment and the education we can provide to the communities would be really nice and a good way to get affordable housing on a more widespread scale. Thank you.
We're going to do a 1-minute follow-up on the same topic, same order. Mondaire Jones, you begin here. Specifically for LGBTQ plus communities, what levers can be pulled at the federal level to help ensure affordable housing for LGBTQ plus communities?
I appreciate the question as someone who is a member of the community and who's been a champion in Congress for the LGBTQ plus community. We know, for example, that young members of the LGBTQ community experience homelessness at a rate of 2 times their cisgender heterosexual counterparts. This is a question of whether the federal government will, using an equity lens, make sure that funds that it allocates to cities and other governments is doing so with precision and with a mindfulness towards making sure that certain of those funds are allocated for senior housing for the LGBTQ plus community and just housing for the community generally. These have been, I understand, debates in parts of the district. Some places are at risk, frankly, of being taken away or not built. We've got to have a champion in Congress representing this district, fighting to make sure that the unique needs of, at times, intersectional communities, right? Because imagine what queer people of color are experiencing when it comes to housing insecurity are addressed at the federal level. And so making sure that we put restrictions and affirmative mandates on those federal dollars is I think, the biggest thing that we can do.
And you seem to be referring there to the Haven Green project in Soho, I assume, in your comment. So what is your stance on that project briefly?
we have to be making sure that we build affordable housing for our LGBTQ plus community, and I'm not going to stop fighting for that.
So projects should go forward.
That's right.
Thank you. Quanda Francis, specifically on housing for the LGBTQ plus community, what levers can be pulled at the federal level?
I think as a data scientist, right, we do sort of a set aside, like, you know, ask the question, you know, how do you identify? I like to call myself a daughter of the movement. In the 80s, you know, my fathers, they took me around, and, you know, on Fifth Avenue, it didn't matter like where I came from. It was like, this is Escada, this is the, you know, they took me outside of the community. But what I had an opportunity to always see is the struggle that they had to just exist, to just be themselves. And so when we talk about advocating and making sure that they have access to affordable housing, again, you know, it seems radical, but it's not. The houses cost $50,000. And when we talk about, you know, even this community, like, what does affordability really mean? You know, we have to get back to the basics of really just quantifying everything so we can measure its effectiveness.
Thank you. Jimmy Lee?
Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, I will agree with Congressman Jones, you know, to put some restriction on the application, right? So you would do audit after, if the we will ensure a certain percentage of housing will go toward LGBTQ community, right? So they won't get discriminated against by this affordable housing process. So yes, there will be a fair process to ensure no discrimination against the our LGBTQ community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Brian Robinson?
I think all marginalized communities, especially those subject to continuous hate crimes like the LGBTQ community, needs our protection, needs our help. As far as what can be done on the federal level to ensure that housing is designated for the LGBTQ community, that's something I would have to look into more. And I don't want to just talk rhetoric. I would have to research it. So from my understanding, you can't build housing with an idea of what type of lifestyle the person would be living in order.
I think you started off right. Look into it more and you can get back to the groups.
Okay.
All
appreciate it.
right, next round, we're going to start with Quanda Francis. Speaking specifically to downtown Brooklyn and the clubs represented here, who are obviously a number of them representing those communities, what are two things specifically in Congress for downtown Brooklyn neighborhoods and communities that you would look to do?
Gun violence and education. We have, you know, the increase in guns. When I worked for the NYPD as a crime analyst, I tracked the sales of firearms. And, you know, I was the first one to sort of raise the flag and say that, you know, Bitcoin, all of these financial crimes were funding the sales of illegal guns in our communities. And so when we talk about, you know, these communities like, you know, Red Hook and just other, well, I don't want to just separate, you know, Red Hook houses because of the incredible amount of gun violence that is occurring in the area, but they've disproportionately felt the brunt of gun violence. And when we talk about in terms of downtown Brooklyn, I want you to know that I understand the unique drivers of gun violence, and we need investments in these communities in order to stop it.
Thank you. Jimmy Lee, two issues specifically for downtown Brooklyn and what you would do about them in Congress.
One issue would be coastal protection. You know, when Sandy hit, you know, Red Hook and the coastal area, we had a really massive damage in this area. So we definitely need to support like do better plan to invest more on that to save our community from climate change and like that. And then the other one would be immigration. The Sunset Park and in downtown Brooklyn, we have a huge, you know, immigrant community. We need to to have a progressive immigration plan like DACA, other immigration reform to provide pathway for our, undocumented brothers and sisters to obtain their citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Robinson, 2 issues specific to downtown Brooklyn and what you look to do in Congress.
I think public safety is a universal issue that we're dealing with. Year to date, hard crime is up anywhere between 50 to 70%, depending on the precinct. And frankly, New York City doesn't take public safety seriously enough. And families are moving out. A lot of families are struggling with the idea of, is this a place that I want to raise my kids in? Is this a nurturing environment? Can I take the subway without getting beat up? So, again, if we don't take care of the mental health crisis that we're dealing with right now, and we don't take care in a compassionate way of the homeless crisis, then right now we're going to hit a catastrophe where, tax dollars will continue to leave this city.
Mondaire Jones.
Thank you for this. The first thing is infrastructure. It's why I'm so proud to, at a time, again, when very few people thought we could pass the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act into law or get Build Back Better passed through the House last fall, I played a key role in bringing progressives like myself and our conservative Democratic holdouts together to get that done. We have to make sure that we are investing adequately in either repairing or reimagining the BQE. I know there's a lot of discussion also about the Brooklyn-Queens connector. If we do that, it needs to be done equitably. That means that folks in Red Hook, for example, need to have access to that light rail. We have to make sure that every community in downtown Brooklyn is getting the resources that it needs. And that is my commitment to you, to fight for as many millions of those dollars from the billions that are coming to New York City from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The other thing is housing. It is extremely expensive to live in this district. And we got to make sure that we are investing in making housing affordable and creating new housing. And that's why I'm proud to co-sponsor and to be supportive of provisions like Build Back Better and other legislation that I mentioned today to make sure that everyone has a right to live in dignity in a home.
2 quick follow-ups. Build Back Better. Do you have a strategy for getting some version of that done that
Yes.
you want to advise right now, right here, the president and Majority Leader Schumer, who's not far away, but
No,
unfortunately has COVID?
Schumer's not far away, and shout out to Chuck Schumer for working really hard. Sorry, Chuck, that you got COVID, like so many of our other colleagues. We got to make sure that we are pressing the White House to resume negotiations as it has done. I mean, there's now been public reporting on this subject. Joe Manchin is back at the table. He's still doing his thing where he says he wants to get a deal and then says no one has reached out to him. But now he's saying that he's there on Medicare negotiation of some prescription drug prices, as well as some other provisions. And so what I've done over the past year or so is sign on to letters and publicly voice my support for starting back with those negotiations, frankly, with the climate provisions, the $555 billion in climate action that were contained in Build Back Better. It looks like we may get some version of Build Back Better before November. I'm not losing hope.
Okay.
Yeah.
And quickly, is it your understanding that there are ongoing conversations about the Brooklyn-Queens connector?
So this is a project that a lot of folks are very animated about, as many people in this room know. It is something that, it is my understanding, is still being discussed. There are people pushing for it. I've met with people who are pushing for it, but obviously it's not been funded. And it's something that mayors have had disagreements with certain city council members on. For example, if you speak to Carlos Menchaca, for example, at the time that he was a city council member, he was opposed to the idea.
After he supported it, but yeah. Okay, so there's some discussions happening and people are bending your ear about it. Okay. Let's move on. We started with Quanda Francis, so we're going to start with Jimmy Lee this time down here. We're actually going to do some quick yes/no questions to break it up, and then we've got about 1 or 2 more questions before we go into some closing statements. So get those microphones ready to pass because these are just yes or no. So we're just going rapid fire here. So we just start this way and go down. There's a few yes or no questions here. All right, first one, yes or no, do you commit to voting to expand the Supreme Court?
No.
Brian Robinson,
Yes.
Mondaire Jones, he's got a mic over there.
It's my bill, so
We think
yes.
we know your answer, yes. Quanda Francis?
Yes,
Yes, okay. Back here, Jimmy Lee, do you favor instituting ranked choice voting for US Senate and House elections in New York? Yes or no?
Yes.
Brian Robinson,
Absolutely not.
Mondaire Jones,
Yes.
Quanda Francis.
yes,
All right, last one for now. Little introduction to this one, but it's still a yes or no. In 2002, the New York State passed the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, but rejected an amendment to provide protections for transgender people. As a result, gender emerged as a standalone legislative issue and didn't pass until 2019. Yes or no? Do you support HR 5, the Equality Act, which would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation, and for other purposes? If yes, would you still support the bill if transgender people were not included? So 2 yes or no's as part of that. Do you support HR 5, the Equality Act? And would you support it? If you do support it, would you support it if protections for transgender people were taken out?
First one is yes. Second one is no if the transgender
Great,
people.
you got the gist. Thank you.
I think that's incomplete if we don't include protections for transgender.
So yes and no. Good. Okay. Mondaire Jones.
Thanks. I'm proud to have helped pass the Equality Act, which includes my bill called the Juror Non-Discrimination Act. And by the way, this is one of the various ways in which we can ensure that discrimination does not occur in the affordable housing context for members of the LGBTQ community. If that bill had not included protections for the trans community, I would not have voted for it.
Thank you. Quanda Francis.
so yes, and if it doesn't include the protections, then no.
Okay. Consensus there. All right. We are probably in our last question here. Actually, I have one directly for Mondaire Jones, a New Kings Democrats member who lives in the Park Slope National Historic District, the largest landmark neighborhood in New York, located in New York 10, said that they fear we've preserved all these buildings at the cost of driving out families who can't afford to rent. How do you balance historic preservation and housing affordability, and what policies can be enacted at the federal level to create such a balance and equitable development?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. A lot of the tension arises from a scarcity mindset. The idea that we cannot preserve historic buildings and protect green space and even create new additional green space while also building new units of affordable housing and making sure that existing housing does not become exorbitant, out of reach for the average person. We can do both of these. We can do all three of the things that I just mentioned, in fact, and that means making sure that we are building new units all throughout this district, not just in some parts of the district. Housing should be affordable everywhere, and affordable housing units should exist throughout this district. And we've got to, frankly, I meet with a lot of folks who think of themselves as progressive, and then you start talking about building some affordable housing in their neighborhood, and all of a sudden that stuff goes out the window. We've got to have leaders who are willing to engage and speak truth to power and bring people along with us. And that's what I've shown an ability to do.
All right, we're going to go down the aisle here again. The question is, just in 30 seconds, your position, each of you, on FOSTA SESTA, passed in 2018. That's the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act and the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. These were passed in 2018. What are your positions on these laws? These are federal. These are signed by then President Trump. I can give you a little more background here. Everybody probably needs that. So this is the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act and the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. These were passed in 2018. They are intended to stop human trafficking, but according to the writers of the question, provide no consequences for perpetrators, and in effect have been used to pressure social media and other online platforms to monitor and censor content related to sex with disproportionate impact on LGBTQ people and content. Does anybody want to comment on this, or people need more time to look into it? It seems, perhaps. Take the mic, please.
I'll speak for myself. Look, I'm wary of what you just described in terms of the likely unintended consequences for members of the LGBTQ plus community, but I feel uncomfortable opining on it until I look into it myself. And obviously, I was not in the United States Congress at the time those bills were passed and signed into law.
All right, so why doesn't everybody agree to look into this a little bit? Particularly Equality New York would like to know your answers on that. So maybe somebody from each of your campaigns can get them some thoughts for, I'm sorry, where? Oh, seconding, yes. Okay, so maybe all the host groups, good. They will be interested. All right, we are into closing statements of 1 minute each, just closing remarks. We are going to start with Mr. Robinson here. Go ahead and give your 1 minute closing to the audience here, please.
I'll end where I started. We're at a critical point in this country. And if we continue to let the polarized elements of each party, the far left, the far right, to continue to tug on the fabric that makes America, America, we're going to be in a bad place. And we're going to wish that we came back to the table with better intentions to find some common ground. This is a really serious issue, and it keeps me up at night. Public safety. We absolutely have to take that more seriously on a national level. We need stronger gun control, and we need to address the mental health crisis here in the city and across the nation. And we need to expand green space. My resiliency policy will include the input of communities so that they're no longer taken advantage of like they were with the East River Park. I want to make sure that green space is expanded every time a resiliency project is created. And I don't want them for commercialized reasons. The science has to add up.
Thank you. Mondaire Jones, in your closing, we do have a prompt for you that includes please addressing your community ties in the district. That obviously you're getting lots of questions about that.
Can I get more than 1 minute
can have
then?
a minute and a half,
Okay,
yeah.
I appreciate that very much.
You can work it together.
You know,
I'm sure.
I got this. Respectfully to my competitor, there is no moral equivalency between progressives in Congress and MAGA Republicans. There is one major political party in this country that is seeking to undermine democracy. 2/3 of my House Republican colleagues voted not to certify that free and fair presidential election from 2020, just hours after nearly dying alongside me at the Capitol that day. Last year alone, over 400 voter suppression bills were introduced in over 40 different states. And in 19 of those states, those bills became law. You've got people on the Republican side saying that they are not going to certify other elections whose ideological outcomes they disagree with. The question before us is, what will our member of Congress from this district do to defeat fascism in this country? And I would submit to you that no one in the entire United States House of Representatives has done more legislatively or in terms of thought leadership to deal with that question. I have co-authored key provisions of the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act. I have been a leader in the fight to get rid of the filibuster over in the United States Senate. Yes, it is my bill to expand the Supreme Court of the United States and to enact other creative ways to rein in the power of that unaccountable institution. I'm proud to have worked in this district, to already have been fighting for communities that comprise this beautifully diverse district, whether it is the fight to fund public housing, end gun violence, enact a humane immigration policy, protect fundamental rights, and end the climate crisis, and yes, fund critical infrastructure projects. I'm a progressive with a track record of delivering results in the United States Congress, and I am the progressive champion for this moment and that this district deserves, and I will never stop fighting for the people of this district. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Quanda Francis.
Weakness at the bottom or strength at the top can be compromised by weakness at the bottom. And we cannot allow so many in this country to go uneducated to their fullest potential. And we have a crisis on our hands right now because we have our neighbors that are in a state of despair that is causing them to not go out and vote, to not take care of themselves, to not be in a position to take care of themselves. And I like to say that I'm what's good about this country. You know, again, I grew up poor in public housing, educated in District 13, but the very poor part of the district. And what I will say is that education was my route out. There were people, NYU did not give up on me. They gave me a chance. There were people that sat with me and made sure that I got it. And now I want to be that lifeline. I understand what it takes to get to this moment. And everything that's going on in this country, a lot of it starts with the fact that our neighbors are not educated to their fullest potential. They don't know how to evaluate information. They don't know how to evaluate the validity of information. So we have a situation where Trump can get elected and say anything, and they believe it because they're not educated to their fullest potential. So we have an opportunity to now send regular folks to Congress that understand the basic needs of the people and fight to ensure that they get what they need.
Thank you. Jimmy Lee, take us home here.
Hi, I do support women's abortion rights. I said no to expanding the court because I believe they won't solve the problem, but we need to have some check and balance on Supreme Court justice, such as term limit and or other measurement to ensure, we will protect women's rights. And if I do get elected, I want to focus on immigration, affordable housing solutions, and infrastructure, job creation. So thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you to our first panel of candidates. Thank you all. We're going to have about 2 minutes as the other panel of candidates gets ready, 2-minute break, and we'll start our second panel.
communication.
All right, we almost ready to go here. We're going to start in 30 seconds. Is anybody speaking ahead of this panel again? No? Okay. Okay. All right, what a great audience. Hi, I'm Ben Max. For those of you who weren't here for the first panel, I'm the editor of Gotham Gazette. You can find us at gothamgazette.com. Thank you to our host groups here tonight. They said some introductory remarks before the first panel, so you can check that out on the video online when it's up. But that's the New Kings Democrats, Lambda Independent Democrats, South Central Brooklyn United for Progress, Equality New York, and the Brooklyn Young Democrats. Thank you to those host groups, and thank you for having me. The first panel had an interesting discussion, and now we have our 5 esteemed candidates here in the second panel. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. They're each going to give 2-minute opening statements, and for you sat yourselves, so let's just go down this way, but in different rounds. I'll ask different people to start, but we'll keep going in that same order. There are group questions, and there are individual candidate questions, and you'll hear me prompt everybody when it's time for each of those. So Carlina Rivera is going to start us with a 2-minute opening statement.
All right, good evening, everyone. Buenas noches. My name is Carlina Rivera. I use the pronouns she and her, and I am dressed in a black blouse and have long brown hair and am tan skinned, for those of you who might need a description. So I'm very excited to be here. I'm a proud, lifelong New Yorker. I'm also a city councilwoman, humbly representing the communities that raised me. I have a very humble story. I grew up in Section 8 housing to a single mother. I grew up on supplemental food programs, and I really took advantage of the programs and services that are here and that are offered in this city. My story: waiting tables to pay for books in the village, having access to the local Planned Parenthood. It sounds like basic access, but that is not true for every family, and it is getting harder and harder to build a life here. I'm running for Congress because I know the issues affecting our community, and I am ready to fight and deliver to bring national resources to our local problems. I'm a very, very effective legislator. I've passed 22 pieces of legislation. I brought over $1 billion into my community, and I'm ready to take those skills in coalition building and hard work to Washington to fight for you. What makes me uniquely qualified? Yes, I do have roots in this district, but I want to make sure that everyone who comes here feels like their elected official is building a future that they can see themselves in. I have a great record, unparalleled community support, and great relationships, and I stand here humbly thanking you for being here and asking for your support.
Thank you. Dan Goldman.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you all for having us here. There is a 5-alarm fire around this country that all too many Democrats think is just a tiny distant flame. Our democracy is under attack. It is under attack by Donald Trump and his Republican-controlled party that is trying to roll back our voting rights around the country and steal the 2024 election. It is under attack by the Supreme Court that is trying to roll back, for the first time ever, our fundamental rights. Everything right now is at stake: the right to vote, the right to choose, and even our democracy itself. The same old playbook that has been going on in Washington for decades now is no longer working. The Republicans are not good faith actors, they're bad faith actors. And so we need to come up with creative, new, fresh approaches to this. Like I did when I led the impeachment investigation of Donald Trump. when we used creative, different strategies than Congress had seen before to actually get the whistleblower complaint, get the transcript of the call from between Trump and Zelensky, and bring in 17 witnesses so that we could prove our case. This is the kind of creativity that we need to tackle our current problems. And our problems are wide ranging. I am raising my 5 children in this district with my wife, Corinne. We've lived in Lower Manhattan for over 15 years. And one of the things that jumps out to me from living here now for more than 15 years is the way that our benefits, our services, our communities are struggling now more than what they have before. I have been committed to public service my entire professional career. As a lawyer, the only client I've ever had was the United States of America.
Thank you.
And I am committed to helping all of our communities tackle our major significant problems, because if we don't beat back these threats against our democracy, we cannot have the policies that we want.
Thank you. Joanne Simon.
Thank you. So I'm Assembly Member Joanne Simon, and I have represented this district of 52nd since 2015. I'm just really, I want to thank all the people who are coming here tonight. And I want to just say, you know, I'm just a working class kid from Yonkers. I moved to Brooklyn about 40 years ago. I've spent most of my career as a disability civil rights lawyer. I've appeared before the US Senate, testifying in support of amendments to the ADA, and I was on the legislative lawyering team for that. So I have deep roots in civil rights law and in representing marginalized communities, which has been the focus of my life. I'm a former teacher of deaf children, and of course now a progressive legislator as well. So when it comes to why I am a legislator and why I'm running for Congress, I think number one, you need thoughtful people whose only answer to the community. I come from community. I was a community leader, a neighborhood association president. I worked with communities throughout the 10th Congressional District, most specifically, most of Western Brooklyn, uniting communities in environmental justice work in communities that had never spoken to each other before. And I did that by listening to people and by respecting everybody and bringing people together in novel ways. So when we talk about sinking the Gowanus Expressway, it was nothing more novel at the time than actually doing that, because nobody had actually done that in the United States. I'm also a creative litigator. And when it comes to the assembly, I have led on issues like campaign finance reform, gender justice, climate justice, criminal justice reforms, and of course, gun violence prevention. I passed the red flag law in New York, which is the country's strongest red flag law. I'm very happy that we have in fact expanded the enforcement of that. And I'm very grateful that the most recent bill passed in DC actually put $1 billion to helping other states create a law like the one we have in New York. I'm very proud to author that. I'm ready to go on day one, and I'm looking forward to your questions, and I hope to have the honor of serving you in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill de Blasio.
I want to thank everyone who is here for this wonderful, hot, sweaty forum. You are all wonderful examples of involved community members, and everyone here got involved for a reason. Everyone here felt urgency about doing something for the community. And I started out involved in struggles that I felt in my core. When I was a student at NYU, the fight to stop nuclear power from being spread across this country, a fight to make sure the United States did not intervene in Central America and repeat the mistakes of Vietnam. And ever since then, I've tried to take those activist ideas and impulses and put them into the work that I do in every way. And I'll tell you that at this moment, I'm feeling tremendous urgency. I've throughout my life felt urgency about being involved, but never more than now, because we're seeing women's rights stolen before our very eyes. We're seeing the environment, the climate destroyed. We're seeing such fundamental attacks on everything we believe in that we have to respond with urgency and intensity. We have to organize people. We cannot assume
the previous way of doing things is going to change what we need to change now. And so why is it so important to choose a member of Congress who can have an impact right now? Because time is running out. Time is running out. If we have the illusion that all we have to do is go to Washington and vote the right way, we're missing, to me, the bigger point. We have to organize for fundamental change. Yes, there can be some victories in the Congress. But how about the Biden administration? In my view, the Biden administration is not doing all they could do right now with their executive powers. Who agrees with that? That we could be doing a lot more, and members of Congress need to push for progressive action from the administration. And right here in the district, in the city, there's so much more that can be done. A member of Congress needs to fight for their community too. I'm going to fight, for example, to stop those cuts to our public schools. My kids went to public schools. Those cuts make no sense after what our schools have been through with COVID. So look, I feel urgency, but I also know things can change. I know things can happen. We created, because of progressive people got together in this city in 2013, we created pre-K for free for every child, 3K for free for every child. We made that happen. We made the $15 minimum wage happen. We made paid sick days happen. We made rent freezes happen.
Thank you.
We proved progressive change can be done, and I will keep that fight going. Thank you.
Yuh-Line Niou. Oh, all right. After these intro applause that everybody's now gotten, let's try to hold those just so we can get through more content. But go ahead, Yuh-Line Niou.
So first I want to, working? Is this working? Hi, my name is Yuh-Line Niou, and first I want to say thank you so much to NKD, LID, all of our Brooklyn clubs for being willing to help to make this forum happen. So thank you so much for your generosity and for the space. I just wanted to say thank you also to the folks who are coming out here today to make sure that, you know, you're hearing our voices. It's really, really hard on this very, very hot summer day. So I appreciate it. You know, right now, we heard over and over and over again with all of the candidates, we know that there's an urgency. We know that there's a crisis happening. We know that we have so many things that we need to change. But I think that the biggest thing that we need to change is we need to make sure that we are actually having the political courage to change things. I think that a lot of folks think about government the way that that I used to as a young person, right? That there were so many things that we want to change, but that rules, regulations, laws might just happen to us, right? And I think that, you know, we have to make it so that people understand, you know, that there is no big secret to accessing government. It's just that there are lots of people who are in power right now who don't want us to know that we can access government. And so that's why it's so important for us to fight. And I know that this is a room full of fighters. I know that the clubs have just had their own fight and amazingly won an incredible slate of candidates. And I also wanted to say that, you know, right now, what we need is political courage. I am somebody who has made that change. I am somebody who has represented my constituents for the last 6 years in the assembly. 100% of my district is inside of this district in District 10. And I just want to continue to represent my neighbors. We have changed the way that Albany looks and works because of me. And I hope that, you know, we will continue to do that with each other. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you. All right. So this one is for everybody, and we're going to start with Joanne Simon this time, go in the same order. So Dan Goldman will finish us off this time. What are 3 bills that you would sign on to sponsor or look to introduce if you're elected to Congress? 3 bills that you would sign on to sponsor or look to introduce if elected to Congress. You have 2 minutes, so a brief description of each is fine. But what are 3 bills that you would sign on to sponsor or look to introduce in Congress? Joanne Simon.
So I would certainly sign on to sponsor, hopefully it gets passed before I get there, HR 1 and HR 4, right? Which are voting rights protections. The Women's Health Protection Act. You know, the Supreme Court told us that we have no right to privacy. And they are now rapidly eroding the whole notion of substantive due process that was the basis for the Griswold decision. So we also need to pass federal laws, because if it's not going to be a constitutional right, it better be a federal statutory right. So I would support that as well. And I would work very hard on climate issues. Climate is the defining issue of our time. It affects everything. It affects all of us, and it affects the vast inequalities that are made worse by the way we have made decisions in the past that have not been equitable from a climate point of view. We need to move to electrification. We need to get away from fossil fuels, and will be there to help lead the charge on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill de Blasio.
Well, first and foremost, the Green New Deal. Green New Deal is absolutely necessary for this country. I supported Bernie Sanders for president in 2020 because I thought his core platform was so necessary for the future of this country. And listen, the Green New Deal, some people act like it is unattainable or too radical. I think it is absolutely what we need. We need that urgency. We actually took elements of the Green New Deal and applied them here in New York City already, including the toughest building emissions laws of any big city in the world, and a new law to cut off fossil fuel connections. So we've proven that you can make these changes on the ground. But to get the Green New Deal done, we're going to have to do a lot more organizing in communities all across the country to show people it can also come with the good union jobs that they deserve. So first and foremost, Green New Deal. I believe in Medicare for all. I believe that that is going to fundamentally change this country for the better. I believe people want it and need it. We proved in New York City, we created guaranteed health care through our public hospitals and clinics with the NYC Care Initiative. And I want to tell you something. When we do universal health care, it must include health care guaranteed for undocumented people in this country. They deserve and need health care, their families, they are members of our community. Medicare for all, including folks who are undocumented. And in Build Back Better are so many pieces that we still need to fight for, including some that still might make it now, like lowering prescription drug costs, for example. But I also believe that what we did here in the city with pre-K and 3K for all, Joe Biden put that in Build Back Better to his credit. But since then, we have not seen the follow through. We need members of Congress who are going to demand that those actions take place, that we legislate. But when the legislative process fails us, we get the executive branch to go much farther than it has gone up to now.
Thank you.
We need urgency to get these things done now.
Thank you. Yuh-Line Niou.
And it's bills that we would support or bills that we would introduce?
Either one. You
Either
choose.
one.
Can be any of the above. Three pieces of
Too many
legislation you
ideas.
would sign on to or introduce.
So a couple of bills that I would sign on to. Obviously, Cory Bush has an incredible bill on safety, and I think that that's an incredible bill for all of us to consider. Another one is obviously the Green New Deal. In particular, I think that greening our public schools is particularly important. Jamal Bowman has a bill right now to make sure that our public schools are green. I think that that in particular is something within this pandemic. We saw that our public schools have been needing fixes for a very, very long time. There's not even windows open for ventilation, et cetera. So this is something that's a priority for me. The other would also be to make sure that obviously we need to fully fund our public housing, right? So Nidia Velasquez has a bill right now that is to fully fund our public housing, but also it's inside of Build Back Better. And I think that we have to make sure that we are actually putting it into as many bills as we can to make sure that we are actually getting the public housing dollars that we need. A couple of bills that I would actually look to sponsor. So one is definitely to make sure that we actually have some kind of regulations, so financial regulations for particularly predatory lending practices that are very, very harmful. Right now we have, these apps, these fintech apps that are making it so that folks cannot get the kind of protections that they need. One of them is, the buy now, pay later type of scenarios, right? People are very used to payday lending, but this is something that's very similar to that. People are now using the buy now, pay later apps to basically pay for regular every single day things. And that's not how, these products are supposed to be regulated. We have to have, set, interest rates, fines, et cetera, fees. But right now there's no laws right now that govern whether or not some of these fines or fees can be very, very predatory or not. And so we have to make sure to do that. There's another bill that I think that, I would definitely look into introducing is also to make sure that we are raising or eliminating certain, fiscal cliffs, certain asset limits to certain social benefits. I think are really important because it helps to make sure that people are not trapped in a cycle of debt.
Thank you. Carlina Rivera.
Well, we can start with the Equality Act. And what's so important about that is to ensure that we are keeping it a very strong piece of legislation. Discrimination in this country, how we are protecting how we are attacking and must protect our trans youth is an urgent issue. And I agree with a lot of my colleagues here. I think you're not going to find a ton of difference in terms of how we're going to vote on certain bills. But I will tell you that the Green New Deal is absolutely a critical piece of legislation because we have to invest in green infrastructure, which would actually prevent bad things from happening and create good jobs. We should do that all along the waterfront, which is a top priority of mine, especially for the Brooklyn waterfront. I would also say that healthcare is absolutely important. Medicare for all is critical. The Women's Health Protection Act. In the City Council, I led efforts to establish the nation's first abortion access fund. I'm sorry to say that will have to be replicated across municipalities across this country. And it is especially important to really support the creation and to fund those initiatives, especially near states that have restrictions and bans. And I will also say, as someone who has introduced and passed legislation that has had national influence, I took on Airbnb to stop illegal hotels from stopping the elimination of the affordable housing stock from the precious little stock that we have left. We are in the middle of an affordable housing crisis in this country, and especially in New York City. I've also passed legislation that it has national influence around transit. We have to set an urban agenda for resiliency and for transportation equity. Unlike anything you have ever seen, the money is there. You need someone to go and fight and negotiate a budget that is going to deliver equitably across the city, and I will fight for every dollar here in NY10.
Thank you. Dan Goldman.
The first bill that I would want to support is one that I actually helped to draft when I worked down in Washington, which is the Protecting Our Democracy Act. This was a bill that has passed, some of it has passed the House, not yet the Senate, and it is essential to curb the abuses of power that we saw under the Trump administration and that we continue to see in our voting rights and in our free and fair elections. Combine that with HR 1, the For the People Act, which would help to nationalize voting laws, eliminate voter suppression laws, prevent states from rolling back prevent states from allowing their own state legislatures to overturn the will of their people. These are essential bills that must become legislation so that we can continue to have free and fair democratic elections. Second, I would of course pass the Women's Health Protection Act, but I think what's even more important is that we codify a couple of things to enable women to still maintain the right to choose, even if they live in states where state laws have taken that away. There is federal supremacy, so federal law controls. One thing that we need to do is to create a vehicle through which women can get access to abortions, whether that be through funds to fly them to other states, or whether that be to provide the veterans hospitals, as an example, to provide abortion. And then finally, among many different things, we have to continue to enact more and more gun control legislation. And we have to do it in a different way. We got a little bit past because the Republicans had nowhere to run this last time. But what we have to do is now go after their pressure points, which are the gun manufacturers and the gun dealers. We need to investigate them and expose what they know about what their marketing and advertising is doing to young adults who are buying assault weapons and committing these mass shootings. If it's anything like the tobacco companies or the opioid companies, that will expose a lot of misdeeds. And I think that that could actually be the one thing that could put pressure on the Republicans.
Thank you. Get ready to pass these mics while you're sitting, because we're just going to do a very brief answer here. So go ahead, you can grab a seat and give it to Carlina if you want here. We're just going to name one federal program that you would seek to add significant funding to that would benefit this district. What's an existing federal program that if you're in Congress, you'd look to more fully fund or get more funding behind that would benefit this district specifically? Bill de Blasio, you have the mic. Go ahead.
$40 billion for our public housing authority for NYCHA.
Thank you. Yuh-Line, Niou?
I would have said the same thing, $40 billion for our public housing.
No.
My
Thank you. Yeah, we're just going to leave it there. Dan Goldman, go ahead.
Yeah, I would significantly increase funding for mental health treatment around the country because that
Okay.
can resolve many different issues that we're facing.
Joanne Simon?
Ditto, and fully funding the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, because we've been failing our children for 45 years.
And Carlina Rivera?
Absolutely. I think we need federal funding for our public housing. Can I just say, right now
Quickly.
we do have a $40 billion problem.
Oh, no,
It is-
you can come back to this another time.
Okay,
but
it's
NYCHA?
incredibly important. It would absolutely be NYCHA, and I encourage
Thank
the
you.
people on this dais to actually walk the hallways
Okay.
and go in the elevators of public housing and
Thank
see
you.
for
We're
yourself.
sticking with housing for a more full answer. We're sticking with housing for a more full answer here, and we're going to start with Yuh-Line Niou this time. What specific federal policies would you support to help create truly affordable housing in this district, particularly in Brooklyn? And how would you measure those outcomes? So what specific federal policies would you support to create truly affordable housing in this district, particularly in Brooklyn? And how would you measure those outcomes? Please.
So I actually think that, fully funding public housing is probably the best way, obviously, to make sure that we have truly affordable housing. I truly believe that the only truly affordable housing that we have actually is NYCHA, is public housing. It's 30% of somebody's income, and you basically are paying whatever that 30% is, right? And that's truly affordable housing. Right now, our federal government has divested for decades. I think it's really important for us to make sure that we actually have investments. We never have fully funded public housing, and we need more public housing rather than less. And we can build more public housing and then make sure that we have very, very sustainable. Like NYCHA used to be a place where people wanted to live, and it should be that again. And that's what we have to fully fund.
Carlina Rivera, specific federal policies to create truly affordable housing in the district, particularly in Brooklyn, and how would you measure that?
Well, I agree that funding public housing is important. I also know that we have hard choices to make when it comes to housing. As I mentioned, this is urgent. I have taken bold, unapologetic stances as to how every community, especially those in transit-rich areas, must contribute to affordable housing. And we should have federal funding linked to actually building enough supply to meet our desperate demand. And that also includes looking at zoning across cities and across towns and across the country. So we have to look at creative solutions, and we also have to fund supportive housing, as well as the organizations that are involved in really creating those wraparound services, that 24/7 care that people desperately need. And that includes mental health support. There is an example in Haven Green on Elizabeth Street where they're creating affordable housing with a nonprofit developer that is specifically there to ensure that people who were formerly homeless and people who need homes have the care that they need. And we have to ensure that we are making bold choices in building housing in transit-rich areas and funding it fully. And that includes public housing and mixed income housing in areas across the city, including NY10. We have to provide our fair share.
Dan Goldman.
We absolutely do need to fund NYCHA. I toured the Jacob Riis houses today, and it's in complete disrepair and needs important funding. But that's not enough. It's not enough to fund our current public housing areas. What we really need is to figure out a way to incentivize private development to create more and better public housing. That is the only cost-efficient way that we are going to be able to increase affordable housing. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean 421A. That's got to go by the wayside. What that means is that we need new standards to require developers when they are getting rezonings and they are using public lands or public subsidies, that they must be required to build a significant portion of their development for fully affordable housing, and not just fully affordable housing, but housing that is prioritized for the people in those local neighborhoods, because too many people are being displaced by the private development. And we need to require these developers who are the experts at developing We can incentivize them to build more and better housing that will go to the communities,
Thank you.
along with community services, public space, education, transit, daycare, that there can be a really high quality private-public partnership that is the best way to create more housing.
Thank you. Joanne Simon.
Thank you. So I represent a district where we have lost tremendous amount of affordable housing that was there. And we have also facilitated the development of massive amounts of housing that are blatantly unaffordable and many that are under the guise of affordability. So there are a couple of things we need to do. We need to deal with the AMI situation so that the AMI that it applies to Brooklyn isn't from Darien, Connecticut. We need to ensure that there is sufficient capital available to not-for-profit housing developers who can build just as good, if not better. They can build it more cheaply because they don't have those profit margins, and they can build more units and more deeply affordable units, which is what we need. What has happened, unfortunately, is the programs we've had have been very insufficient for actually developing affordable housing. This is a district where I have lost tons of rent stabilized housing in this district. The NYCHA developments in this district are in woefully a bad state. I mean, to me, we're basically killing people by asking them to live in NYCHA developments right now. So we have to do that. We have to get that $40 billion. We have to do that repair. But we also need to look at things like, what about Mitchell-Lama? That was the best overall affordable housing program that New York State ever did.
Thank you.
But Mitchell and Lama died, and so did the housing with it. So we need to look at a
We're
lot
going
of
to
these
leave it
creative
at
ideas.
Mitchell
Thank
Lama,
you.
please. Bill de Blasio to round this out.
Thank you. Thank you. I will just say, Joanne makes a very important point that I'll answer the federal question, but we really need to get the state of New York into the game of helping us create more affordability, helping us with public housing, which the state of New York has shrunk from, and opportunities like Mitchell-Lama. I think a member of Congress doesn't just go to Washington and vote. I think you organize in communities for the funding communities need, whether it's from the city government, state government, the federal government. But on the purely federal level, the $40 billion for NYCHA is, yes, that is the purest, best affordable housing we have, and it needs to be made everything it should be for the people who live there. They were supposed to have constant federal investment. We haven't seen that literally in 3 or 4 decades. But I think the other piece of the equation doesn't get talked about enough is Section 8. Section 8 is far from perfect the way it's structured now. But if it was funded much more substantially, if the vouchers were funded at a higher level, if we were provided a lot more vouchers, it would be profoundly important to tens of thousands of families in this district and beyond. Now, this is for reasons I've never fully understood. The federal government has gotten a pass on not funding public housing, even though they created it and pledged to be permanent supporters of it. And they've gotten a pass on the fact that they have receded away from Section 8 commitments, both in terms of number of vouchers and the amount each voucher is worth. The next Congress member from this district needs to go fight to change both of those policies. I will do that because I know what it means for people who live here.
There is Yuh-Line Niou is going to answer this question directly. There's a question specifically on your position on the Haven Green project in Soho, the initiative to build 100% affordable housing for formerly homeless LGBTQ plus seniors. Please explain your opposition to that project. I heard Carlina Rivera reference it in the first panel. Mondaire Jones also referenced in support of that project moving forward. Please explain your opposition to that project and what you would do to advance the needs of LGBTQ plus older adults instead of that project.
Yeah, so thank you so much for asking that question. I personally think that we should never be pitting, especially in downtown Lower Manhattan. If you know the area, we don't have an issue with density. We love density, and we have a lot of density there, and we have a lot of housing there. But we also want to make sure that there is no pitting of green spaces and housing. And I think that it's really important that we are recognizing that there was an alternate site that was slated that people could have used. And I think that it's really important that people also know that the housing is a lottery, and it was not particularly for LGBTQ folks, but there is an important organization that's in there, SAGE. And I think that we have to continue to fund SAGE. And I think that we have to make sure that we have the funding for SAGE and make sure that there's social services for our LGBTQ communities that are very, very much necessary for our elderly. I think that it's really important also to recognize that in Lower Manhattan, we also had another development that was slated to happen that was very dangerous. And I think that one of the things that folks don't understand is that the only way to push back to get more housing, to get more affordability, by the way, the original plans for Haven Green were not that kind of affordability. And I have to note that in our district, we also had to push back against Rivington House. And Rivington House was an incredibly, incredibly important piece of landmarked property for our LGBTQ community. And it was long-term care facility that had 2 deed restrictions that were lifted. 2 deed restrictions that were lifted that had the words forever in them. Forever, it was supposed to be for our LGBTQ community to have long-term care. And then forever, it was supposed to be a healthcare facility. And yet the city somehow was able to lift both deed restrictions, apparently left hand not talking to the right hand, and then make it so that it could have been luxury development. And so somehow it was, somehow sold to luxury developers for $100 million in profit.
This next question, thank you. This next question is for Bill de Blasio and Joanne Simon only to answer it from one of the groups here or a participant. In the past 10 years, we've seen the status of the BQE deteriorate quickly and more than a few ideas for fixing it come and go. That said, we're now looking at a DOT traffic rerouting plan that may have significant residual impacts on the community for a long time. Both of you were in positions of power to impact getting access to available state and federal funding to make sure something got done in a reasonable time, and yet nothing has been done, and the project looks like it will drag on for the foreseeable future. So the question to both of you is, why has it taken so long for money to be accessible for this project? Why wasn't it allocated earlier when you both held positions of power? And what can be done to fast track a solution that meets the planning needs of the community?
So I think the plan last year actually addresses those questions. And what I'm concerned about, and this is something I'm going to address to the new administration, is I think there's some slowing down on that plan. I think that's a mistake. The plan last year said by reducing the amount of traffic, by reducing the number of lanes, and having much stronger restrictions on the biggest size trucks and enforcement, that we could prolong the life while working out the long-term solution. The long-term solution really needs to be to get our freight all out of large trucks into much smaller and preferably electric vehicles. And it's actually a viable thing to do, because the alternative that we can tap into is our railways in this city, which are substantial, and our waterborne freight, which is this extraordinary opportunity that has never been addressed for generations in the city. But this is where I, as a Congress member, would fight in Washington, but also in Albany at City Hall, to totally reconfigure how we move goods in this city. If we want to reduce pollution, protect the climate, reduce congestion, we've got to get off the highways that we're using now the way we use them. We can do it. But the short term, I believe that because of the changes made, if the current administration follows through on last year's plan, it will give us the time to make the bigger changes I'm discussing.
Do you want to say anything briefly about why it took so long? Last year, obviously, was your final of 8 years.
The first iteration of the plan was a mistake. I understood it was offered by DOT. I was sympathetic personally to its goals, but when we heard back from the community, it was quite clear it wasn't the best plan. And by the way, other folks said, other people with good ideas said, you're missing how much bigger we could go with a solution.
Okay.
And I've agreed with them. And we found a way to address the short-term need and the safety needs so that we could get to that bigger
Thank
solution.
you. Joanne Simon, your answer to the question. Let me know if you wanted to repeat part of it.
No, I think I have most of it. So that's right. You're not kidding. I live this. So I've been living the Gowanus corridor for 20 years, trying to make that an environmentally just corridor with transportation that will not be killing people as it drives by. So yes, we need to electrify, and we need to get into smaller trucks, and we need to use waterborne transportation for the transmission of goods through the corridor. But here's the thing. The one thing that is the real reason why And by the way, we did pass legislation to have automatic electronic monitoring and finding of overweight trucks, which is now being implemented and is going to be in operation in a few months, which is critical. We had a fight for that in Albany. We had a fight for design build in Albany. We were finally able to get that. There's a great deal of resistance to it, but overwhelmingly the issue really with the BQE is we were planning that a long time ago. I was going to those meetings in 2006, 2007, 2008. But then when, maybe it started 2007, 2008, when Andrew Cuomo got elected governor, he took the money and went to the Tappan Zee. And the state dropped the project, and the state under federal law is the lead agency. They can't get federal money without the state being involved and doing what it needs to do to get that. It never did that in this instance. In fact, it just played games with the mayor and fought that, right? So the real issue is we've been fighting for this. I've been to see the governor. I've been to see every DOT commissioner. I've been to see everybody, but we really needed a new governor. That was really the solution. And we have a new governor, right? I got my wish. And there you have it, you know. But the reality is that's where the power is. You know, a legislator can vote on bills. We don't actually appropriate and we don't direct the state DOT. We just have to advocate for it along with our communities. And I have been there every step of the way with the community on this issue. Thank you.
And is the new governor ready to do more, or do you have that?
They are now cooperating in a very different way.
Okay.
And in fact, once at one point when they were instituting the changes, the state didn't put up the intelligent signage, you know, that was going to tell people that it was being rerouted. And there was some sort of resistance to that. And I called the governor's office. It was in by the end of the day.
Okay. Going right down the line with individualized questions, Dan Goldman. Question is, what specific local issues have you engaged with and fought for? Folks obviously know some of your national profile, appearances on MSNBC, work in the impeachment investigation, but what is a or more than one local issue that you've engaged with and fought for?
I spent 10 years as a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. And as a result of that, I was prohibited from engaging in a lot of political activity. Since then, and since I returned from Washington, I've become much more familiar with a lot of the issues that are affecting the Lower Manhattan communities, the Brooklyn communities. The one that I have, the two that are closest to where I live and that I've become most immersed in are the 9/11 healthcare fund. I lived in Lower Manhattan on 9/11. I will never forget that day, watching people marching up Hudson Street where I lived, covered in soot, and then after that having the city and the state tell everybody that it was perfectly fine and healthy to be down there by the pile, by ground zero. We now know that was completely false. And last week I called for the immediate passing of legislation to fully fund the 9/11 healthcare program. The second thing is 5 World Trade Center. That to me is the perfect example of the kind of public-private partnership that I'm talking about when it comes to housing. 5 World Trade Center must be 100% affordable, and it must not need to be fully subsidized by the government. The developers, Silverstein Properties, Brookfield Properties, have made a tremendous amount of money based on insurance proceeds, bonds, and government subsidies. And that's the kind of thing that they need to be giving back to the community to make that deeply and fully affordable, and giving priority to the 9/11 first responders and others who have lived in that community.
Thank you. Carlina Rivera, you just voted to approve a budget that effectively allows the DOE, the Department of Education, to cut public school budgets by hundreds of millions of dollars while increasing the NYPD budget when you pledged to not vote for a budget that didn't cut funding to the NYPD. How do you defend this vote, especially given that it was taken weeks before the fiscal year deadline?
Well, I will say with our education budget, there are a few fundamental flaws. The fair student formula is deeply flawed, and the link between enrollment and school funding isn't fair. Something that I do every single year is I prioritize my schools to be funded. And unfortunately, with a lack of funding coming from the city, or I would say the mayoral administration, I fund things like tech, new gyms, ACs in the cafeteria, and constant programming throughout the entire day. And my district that I represent in the city council is very, very reflective of what's going on in our New York City school system. School District 1 is essentially a circle around low-income housing, working families, and public housing, while School District 2, which completely surrounds it, is an affluent, wealthy school district where PTAs can raise $1 million. It is very, very unequal. So what we're trying to do in the city council is ensure that we are holding the mayor accountable and that he can rectify those cuts and ensure that we are working with our schools to get them the support that they need. I also believe that more federal funding for our school system is important, and community schools like the one I was just at PS 188, which is an incredible model of helping the entire family and using in a holistic approach to help support families, is really the way to go going forward. I will say that to ensure public safety, it has to be a very, very intersectional approach. You need complementary strategies that address the root cause of crime, violence interrupter programs, treating gun violence as a public health issue, and ensuring that there are educational programs, workforce training opportunities available in every single neighborhood, not just the well-resourced.
Is there something quickly you want to say about why you were a yes on this budget as opposed to opposing it, voting no as you did a couple of years ago?
I think this budget, we fought for things that were incredibly important, and including keeping 0 additional corrections officers added to Rikers Island when there are over 1,000 corrections officers who are currently not being found in the system and not going to work when there is a humanitarian crisis unfolding in that jail system. And in 2020, there was no equity with those cuts across the agencies. We were cutting things like geriatric mental health, and yet the NYPD budget increased. I try to be equitable in terms of how I approach budgets, and I think you'll find that what I've been able to deliver for my district around food, healthcare, housing, education, arts and culture, public safety, reproductive justice, it's a record that I am incredibly proud of, and it's the skills in delivering and those relationships that I've built and the confidence that people like Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, Council members Lincoln Ressler, Alexa Viles, Eric Botcher, and community leaders across NY10 know that I've delivered in the past, and I will continue to do so as a Congresswoman for NY10.
Thank you. All right, let's get you ready to pass the mic for some quick, short answers here. We're gonna move fast in this next short period here. I thought this was interesting because it was something I was thinking about coming in terms of if there's policy areas where you think you do set apart from your competition. Carlina Rivera mentioned something earlier about everybody seemingly, voting pretty similarly on a lot of things. So I want to give you each a chance. Do you think there is one thing that you either support or oppose that is different from your competitors in this race? Is there a policy stance on a particular issue, again, either in support or opposition, that you think sets you apart?
I would say
you said earlier you don't think so. So it's a tough question for you, but what do you think?
Well, what I'll tell you is this. I think many of us want to end the filibuster and codify Roe, and we want to expand the court, and we want to ensure that we have more comprehensive legislation around gun violence and that prevention. And certainly we want to act on climate justice. What I would tell you is that what I've done differently are a few things. Around climate justice, the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project was a very difficult project to usher through because of management issues and a lack of communication sometimes from some of the stakeholders that were involved. But what I am proud of is how we came together as a coalition and as a community to ensure that a neighborhood that was historically underserved received over $1 billion, a lot of which they earned through a federal competition called Rebuild by Design, of which I was a community organizer. We were able to bring that money in and ensure that we're going to get a park that's rebuilt and fortified, where we can protect families for multiple generations going ahead, from future storm surges.
All right,
That's
everybody's going to
incredibly
get
important. And I
every-
will tell you that my work around reproductive justice, affordable housing,
Dan
and climate
Goldman.
justice is unmatched by this
All
panel.
right, everybody's going to get 1 minute now on this question, but we're going to keep it tighter on the next few in this round. Go ahead. What's one thing you think sets yourself apart on a policy position in opposition or support?
Well, I think what really sets me apart is my approach. I do think that for the most part, we'll find differences. I actually don't know everybody else's policy views on all the different things, so I don't want to opine on what sets us apart. But what I do know sets me apart is that I am the only one who's actually been down in Washington and been effective. I proved the case against Donald Trump. And that sets me apart from all the rest of the people in this. I'm the only one who stood up to Donald Trump. And what I think that we need is a completely different playbook. It is one thing to go to Albany and to work with Democratic colleagues and a Democratic governor to pass legislation. It is an entirely different animal to deal with Republicans in Washington, D.C. I stood up to them. I understand them. I recognize they are bad faith actors and that we need a different playbook in order to actually get many of the policies that we all agree with actually get results.
Thank you.
And that's a big difference, I think, than what you will hear from a lot of the other candidates here.
Thank you. Joanne Simon.
Well, I've served in the state assembly when the state Senate was Republican. And certainly I know my colleague here has heard many of the same kinds of comments that I know the debate is in Washington from the GOP. So I would say that what is different about me and my perspective is that I am coming from community. I don't come from politics. I don't come from just policy. I've never been a prosecutor. I've been a civil rights litigator. I've been working for people with disabilities, the LGBTQ community. I have represented people in dire straits who need the protections of our federal government, our federal laws. So I come at this from community, and I know community. I listen to them. I talk to them all the time. I'm an extremely accessible legislator. I would continue that track record. And I think that while there are many proposals that we would agree on, there are probably some things I would do a little differently. I would, for example, support Sheldon White House's bills with regard to the Supreme Court. They need to disclose their conflicts and their money. They need, in fact, to have a code of ethics. That is critical. So it doesn't matter whether they're there for 10 years or 14 years if they're crooks.
Thank you.
Or if, et cetera. So
Great.
anyway, there you have
Thank
it.
you. Bill de
I will
Blasio.
end there. Thank you.
Thank you. As I've been out talking to folks all over the district, I hear so many parents concerned about what's happening to our public schools. And this is an area of differentiation because public schools are precious to me. I was a community school board member in District 15. My kids went to New York City public schools all the way through. And I was actually shocked that the school budget was cut after the full brunt of the COVID crisis hit our kids and our teachers and our school communities. It made no sense to me. No sense at all. So I respect everyone up here, but to me, that was a line in the sand moment. You do not take money away from public schools after they've just gone through the biggest crisis in generations. And by the way, kids are hurting. They're hurting. They're emotionally hurting right now. They're academically hurting. They need more investment, not less, in every single corner of this district and this city.
Thank you. Yuh-Line Niou.
So I think that there are some things that we probably have in similar, similar and have different for each of the candidates. So I would say for myself, I would also talk about a little bit about my approach. I think that it's definitely from my lens. I am somebody who is disabled. I'm queer. I'm Asian American. I'm a woman of color. I think that having a different lens is really, really important for legislation. And then having the ability to have that political courage is also very, very different. I have always stood up when it came to tough budgets, when it came to standing up against special, powers for the governor, standing up against bad vetting, standing up against predatory practices, standing up against corruption. And so I think that I have stood very, very clearly in a place where I am not afraid to take the hard stance if it's the right one. I have never been afraid. And I think it's shown.
Thank you.
And I think that that's the biggest difference between me.
Thank you. All right, these are grab those mics. These are actual yes or no questions now. These are yes or no questions. I have a 5-year-old, so I can shout over you if I need to. All right, these are 3 yes or no questions. You want to grab the mic, and we'll start here. Will you commit, Carlina Rivera, we'll start with you and go down. Will you commit to voting to expand the Supreme Court? Yes or no?
Yes, and there's precedent.
Yes. Next.
I think we can expand it to 2, but I think term limits are a much more realistic and better option.
I would expand and institute term limits.
Okay.
I support both emphatically.
Okay.
I also support both. Thank you.
Okay. Start again here at the beginning. Yes or no? Do you favor ranked choice voting for U.S. Senate and House elections in New York? Ranked choice voting, yes or no?
Well, yes, I pushed it for it on the municipal level, just like our city,
Next.
our vote.
Yes, next. Thank
More
you.
voting.
Next.
Yes, anything that promotes democracy.
All right.
Yes.
Yes, but it's a lot better with matching fund system.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Last one on the yes, no right now. There's a little bit of a preamble here, but it's still a yes or no question. In 2002, New York State passed the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, but rejected an amendment to provide protections for transgender people. As a result, Genda emerged as a standalone piece of legislation, didn't pass until 2019. Yes or no? Do you support H.R. 5, the Equality Act, which would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation, and for other purposes? And if yes, would you still support the bill if transgender people were not included? So there's 2 yes or no's here, actually.
We have to protect our trans community, our queer community. There's no question and there's no weakening. And I think I stated this earlier. I am in full support of this bill and we'll work to get it passed.
So that's a yes and a yes. Dan Goldman.
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
yes.
I'm sorry. My mistake. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. That was a yes and a no, and I assume a yes and a no. My mistake.
You have really confused us now.
Do you support? Do you support? Apologies. Do you support the Equality Act?
Yes.
And if so, if transgender protections were removed, would you still support it?
No.
Sorry about that.
Yes and no.
Thank you.
Yes and no.
Thank you. All right. Our folks, we didn't have familiarity with this in the first panel, but I want to ask if there's familiarity in this panel with the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act and the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. These were passed in 2018 into law. The Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act and the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. And they were passed into law in 2018, signed by President Trump at the time. There's criticism and concern from the sponsoring groups here about the passage of those laws and the implementation. Are folks familiar with those and ready to comment? Does anybody want to comment on what you do about them if elected? We can take a moment, and if others are not that familiar, the groups ask that you look into it and have someone reach out about how you would approach the issues.
I'm fully against Sesta Fosta. I think it's very, very, very harmful to our sex workers. I think that sex work is work, and I'm fully in support of full decrim. Thank you.
I am somewhat familiar with the bill. From what I understand, there is a feasibility study there to look at it, to take into account many different factors. And what I will tell you is that I do not discuss a bill legislation, whether I'm introducing it or co-sponsoring it, without the advocates. Please look at my record and what I've been able to do. I pass legislation, I introduce it with stakeholders and advocates always at the table. And that's what I would do in looking into these pieces as well.
Thank you. Oh, okay, quickly.
I want to look into this a little bit more. I want to understand the objection to it. What I will say is that as a prosecutor who supervised and prosecuted sex trafficking cases, the use of online advertising for sex trafficking cases were a great enabler for sex traffickers to actually advertise and benefit from those that they captured in the sex slave trade. And so I think that to the extent that it eliminates opportunity for sex traffickers to hold usually women, but often, very frequently other LGBTQ individuals against their will and sell them in the sex trade, that having these prohibitions actually are quite beneficial. All that being said, I would want to understand a little bit better the details of the law and hear from the groups here as to what your objections are.
The groups hosting the forum here were supportive of the Brooklyn Can't Wait slate for district leader elections that just occurred. They note that Yuh-Line used. Oh, did you want? No,
I didn't answer that question.
Oh, I was sort of leaving that open to who wanted to speak up. So if you want to, please.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought it was we were.
It was more of a, if you're familiar, weigh in. If not, please get back to the groups with your.
Okay.
Your
Well, I'm somewhat familiar with it, but I would also say that what you have to do is you have to read the bill, and anything that comes out of the Trump administration that has that name, is going to be a problem. It kind of sounds like QAnon, right? It's all about sex trafficking, except for the fact it's really not about sex trafficking. So in my mind, there's probably a lot that we can do on that. I certainly will look into it further.
Thank you. Okay, so the groups here were supportive of the Brooklyn Can't Wait slate of district leader candidates that were represented in the elections that just occurred in June. The groups here note that Yuh-Line used her platform to support the slate, and they want to know from.
Go ahead.
Joanne Simon's going to lead us off here. They would like to know from others on the stage. Did you do anything to support that slate of district leader candidates? And what do you have to say about those elections that just occurred?
I was there at the initial launch of Brooklyn Can't Wait. So I think number one, that says that I was there. I show up, I'm honest, and I'm engaged. I've been engaged in the issue of reforming the Brooklyn Democratic Party for many, many years. When I was a district leader, there was maybe 4 of us that had the guts to vote against the county leader at any time. I am thrilled that there are many more people that have joined that fight. And in this most recent election, we expanded that. It's a good thing. It's a welcoming thing. My district always welcomed everybody who was going to actually be a reform-minded person. So I'm very supportive of that. And that's my answer. And I did tweet about it,
Okay. So
if you want to know, I tweeted
at
about
the
it
launch
too.
and you tweeted about it.
I've had several of those.
Bill de Blasio, any comment on support or lack thereof of that slate and the elections that just occurred?
Well, I was not involved, but I do want to say I think a lot of change is happening in the Brooklyn Democratic Party, and I think I admire and appreciate the efforts that have been made. When I ran for public advocate, I'm from Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Democratic Party opposed me. When I ran for mayor, I'm from Brooklyn, but the Brooklyn Democratic Party opposed me. I've never been someone who's been part of that world, but I appreciate that the impact that folks have made at the grassroots in this election, and I think we're about to see a lot of change in Brooklyn.
Just quickly though, you do have a close relationship with the current leader of the Brooklyn Democratic Party. Do you think there should be a change in leadership of the Brooklyn Democratic Party?
I do have a close relationship because we work together on things like increasing opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses in Albany, and that was the right thing to do, and I'm proud we did that. But I have to say, I'm not pleased with what's going on in the party. Obviously, there was a lot of division. There was a lack of transparency and democracy. So I think what's happened here is going to open up the possibilities of bigger change.
Carlina Rivera.
All right. Well, I will tell you when I endorse a person, I try not to make it symbolic. Try not to make it just on paper or just a simple retweet. I typically go all in on candidates. So you can see actually some past campaigns I've been heavily involved in. One is supporting the candidates on the No IDC campaign. Please look into how I stepped up for Jessica Ramos, Alessandra Biaggi, among many, many others, and electing a historic women majority in the city council, making dozens of endorsements and going out across the city, mobilizing resources and volunteers to make that happen. And I'm very proud of it. I know a lot of people on the slate. I think they're great. They know that they have my support. They could always call me and ask me. I have personal relationships with them. So I'll be there every step of the way to ensure that we have a progressive and even insurgent candidates coming in. I was a district leader myself. I think a hyper-local position and a volunteer one at that is an important one for civic engagement and democracy. And I have mentored other district leaders along the way, state committee people, et cetera. And
Thank
I'm
you.
excited to do that going forward.
Dan Goldman?
I just want to say quickly, I was not involved in it, but what I am
kind of
most
music is that?
happy to hear about is the degree of
Have you
engagement,
listened to it?
especially young people in Brooklyn. What makes this very heartening and what the process very heartening is the number of people who have gotten involved in the political process. And if we are to save and preserve our democracy, it is going to take everyone together to do it. There'll be people in Washington, there'll be people at home, there'll be people around the country, but we all have to do it together. And so I was really encouraged just to see the level of engagement.
Okay, 1 minute from everybody. Yeah, go ahead. You got the round of applause. Maybe you want to add. Go ahead, quickly, please.
So I just wanted to say that I'm really, really, really proud of the work that the Brooklyn Can't Wait slate did. And I also want to say that we actually on the ground did for the Brooklyn Can't Wait slate, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calls and volunteer shifts for everyone. And I think that that goes to show our incredible volunteers, our incredible ground game. And I think that that's what makes it so that we can actually continue to have like pathways and mentorship. And I have to say that, you know, the folks, some of the folks who won were actually, you know, mentored from our office, and we have to continue to uplift our young people and continue to grow people. So I want to say thank you to all of you for being willing to back such an incredible slate of activists.
Thank you. All right. We're in our last couple rounds here. This is for everybody, 1 minute each. What will you help to do if elected to Congress to protect residents of Gowanus against climate change issues, especially as we will see further development in that area based on the rezoning that was passed last year? How will you coordinate with federal and state agencies to ensure that the pollution is addressed and remediated, and that the future and current residents of the area are protected? Bill de Blasio, you have the mic. Why don't you get started?
Thank you very much. Look, I think the bottom line for the next Congress member is to push the federal government to perform when it comes to addressing climate on every level. Look, the EPA to me has taken a long time to achieve the things we need in our community in terms of cleaning the Gowanus. I think a Congress member has to recognize, again, voting on the right legislation matters, but pushing federal agencies to do their jobs, especially with rising sea levels. So to me, it is getting the EPA to be more deeply involved in addressing the problem, and it's going to the big picture. The best way to help people in the Gowanus is the best way to help people all over this district and this city, which is the Green New Deal, to go at the core of the climate problem. If we don't cut off the climate crisis with really intensive changes quickly, then all of the remediation is not going to be able to keep up.
Okay, so I represent the Superfund site at the Gowanus and have been deeply engaged in this issue for a very long time. So number one, yes, of course, we need the Green New Deal. I'm happy to have been a sponsor of New York State's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is our Green New Deal and our Green Amendment for a right to clean air and water that we passed and the voters have endorsed in the last election. So we need all of those things. But when it comes to representing people on the ground, you need to be able to talk to your neighbors and you need to understand what their problems are. And the reality is the toxicity at that area is enormous. It is among the most highly polluted sites in the entire country. And it's one where, frankly, not every party has stepped up and built certain things, like we are years behind on some of the EPA's mandated remedy, which is the sewage retention tanks. That is a city project. They are way behind doing that. We need them to do that. We need them to do it now. And we need for the administration to cough up the money and make sure that the DEP engages the right people to ensure that we actually have that remedy. Because no matter what we do, no matter what we develop, no matter what you clean on the ground, if we are not dealing with the CSOs and we're not cleaning the Gowanus Canal, it will all be for naught and people will still be dying of cancer and other environmental toxic diseases. So I am all about the Green New Deal, but I'm also all about how it affects people on the ground in my district. And I will be there fighting with people every step of the way on this.
Thank you. Dan Goldman.
I had the opportunity to tour the Gowanus Superfund site a couple of weeks ago with the Voice of Gowanus, and a couple of things jumped out to me. First of all, We need to expand the Superfund area to go beyond just the boundaries of the canal. It needs to go into the spillover onto the side areas, which are so polluted. Second, we do need, as Bill said, to really put pressure on the EPA. The coal tar issue is unlike many environmental issues in the Gowanus, unlike others that the EPA has dealt with. And we have to make sure that before we put any development on there, that the EPA is spearheading a proper cleanup to ensure that the toxicity does not leak into the buildings. I think it does bring a broader message, and this goes for the potential city jail in Chinatown, as well as other areas where they're talking about rezoning or building. We need to ensure that the environmental issues are addressed properly, that if the jail is torn down, that the asbestos does not run rampant all over Chinatown. The EPA needs to be more engaged, more involved, and that's something that a congressperson can do to ensure that the EPA is more involved.
Thank you. Carlina Rivera.
The designation of the Superfund site at Gowanus was led by Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez. She stood up and was fearless and bold and did not quit until it got done to ensure that that community was taken care of, because she understands how complex, how toxic, and how that project can determine how other projects going forward are met and implemented. She is supporting my campaign. She knows that I've also been unapologetic on climate change issues, especially on infrastructure projects that might be a little controversial, that might be the first of its kind in this city and even the country. But you need people to be unapologetic and bold. Absolutely, we need interagency communication. When you have federal, state, and local offices all working together, communication sometimes doesn't always happen. And so you need a congressperson to be able to lead those conversations, bring people together, whether it's on the BQE, Gowanus, ESCR. You have to invite stakeholders. You have to leverage your national platform to do that. Right now, the Supreme Court is issuing decision after decision, coming after rights, weakening important agencies. And so for someone to have the experience, for someone to understand that there are communities in this city that are suffering, and that we need to have an equitable approach to how we look at resilient and social infrastructure going forward, that is going to be a part of the national and international conversation.
Thank you.
But that'll be a part of our ongoing dialogue going forward. So we need to ensure that we're holding folks accountable, agencies accountable, and that we're leading a productive and comprehensive discussion that is rooted in facts and that is rooted in steps forward in a timeline that's always community led.
On protecting residents of Gowanus from climate change, sea level rise, and heavy rainstorm and so forth, especially as more development is slated for the area.
Yeah, so thank you. And I just have to note that because I am on the spectrum, it's so hard to break the rules. So I'm like always like I'm tailoring my answers exactly to time. So I apologize for not taking advantage of the fact that you're nice. So I just wanted to I wanted to note that I used to work for the US EPA. And so because I used to work for the US EPA, I also worked on the US EPA when it was under Lisa Jackson. And one of the things that I think people forget, we can't just talk about environmentalism. We have to talk about environmental justice. And we have to talk about how environmental justice works, is that there's environmental segregation that is happening every single day. And we cannot talk about Gowanus without talking about the fact that there is actually some huge issues that the community is facing right now. And we have to make sure that we're actually listening to the community, because we have a lot of displacement that's happening. And we need to make sure that the conversations are involving our communities, and especially the communities of color that are affected.
Why don't you, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to note also that when we are talking about the environmental issues that are surrounding Gowanus right now, we cannot even the very basic things like the idling trucks and the pollution that people are breathing in every single day. That's part of the environmental segregation that people are experiencing every single day down there. And I think that it's really, really important that we're noting that. And on the federal level, we can make certain changes to make sure that, we are stopping this environmental segregation. And on top of that, making it so that we are having a full holistic conversation there, because it's not just the pollution that's in the ground already, it's also the pollution that's happening constantly in the air.
Thank
and
you.
so we have a lot of work to do there.
Pass that microphone to Joanne Simon, please. We are moving into closing statements, and Joanne Simon will lead us off. The candidates are going to give 1 minute closing statements here. Before they do, since I have your attention for a moment, I'll just say again now, thank you to the clubs that hosted tonight. And if, yes, round of applause. New Kings Democrats, Lambda Independent Democrats, South Central Brooklyn United for Progress, Equality New York, and the Brooklyn Young Democrats. Thanks for having me. I'm Ben Max again from Gotham Gazette. You can find us at gothamgazette.com. And closing statements, 1 minute each. Joanne Simon.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Ben, for moderating this forum, as well as to all of the clubs that put this on today. So I want to say a couple of things. Number one, as a community leader, I led comprehensively with communities throughout this area, including Western Brooklyn. I was leading on environmental justice issues before most people knew what that term meant. And I have worked with community of all sizes and stripes throughout my district, right? Among the people most affected by the Gowanus Superfund are in fact our public housing residents. I have been there, I work with them, and I have made sure that their voices were at the table in the Gowanus rezoning. So what you need to know is, number one, I have a long track record of working with people in every community. I will continue that fight in Congress. I will lead with that passion and that knowledge that I have about this district, and I will represent everybody in this district equally. And in fact, I will represent some people maybe more equally because they've been more burdened, right? So the excessive burdens that our communities of color feel when it comes to the Gowanus Expressway, for example, and all of the transportation that we need here in downtown Brooklyn. Climate is the key issue here, and it is something that affects all of us, and it affects all of our children, and it affects their brains as they develop. Having worked a lot in neurotoxicity with learning disabilities for many years, that's an issue that I care about very deeply.
Thank you. Bill de
thank you.
Blasio. Thank you.
You know, it's very hard in 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne Simon. Bill de Blasio.
So in this most urgent of times, the question is who can make an impact for our communities right now? When COVID hit, I led the nation in creating vaccine mandates that saved lots of lives. When we saw the opioid crisis take on whole new horrible proportions, I led the nation in creating overdose prevention centers, saving lives. When we saw massive inequality in our city, I created pre-K for all and 3K for all. When we saw the $15 minimum wage as an answer to folks being left out, I led the way, New York City led the way, and helped establish it as an idea for the whole country. The same with paid sick leave. The same with the rent freeze, which is the first time we ever saw it in half a century in this city's history. My point is, I don't just talk about a progressive set of ideals, I bring them to life. And our people, the people of the 10th district and the people of this city, this nation, we need actual impact right now. People are hurting after COVID, after the recession, everything people have been through, they're hurting. They need not just great ideas. They need leaders who will get them help now. The next Congress member from the 10th district has to be able to do that. And I submit to you, with your help, I've been able to make big, tangible, progressive changes. I intend to do a lot more as your Congress member.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill de Blasio. Yuh-Line Niou.
Thank all of you for being here today. And I just want to say, this has been the honor of my life to be able to serve my constituents for the last 6 years as the assembly member. And I think that, it has been really, really difficult to always take the courageous stance. And I will continue to be the political courage that's needed in Congress, just like I was in Albany. We were able to get $1 billion, more than $1 billion to our public housing from the state level, which, before I was elected, we never got. And we were able to close the loophole on sexual harassment when, even though we passed, 2019, we passed record sexual harassment in the workplace legislation, yet we exempted ourselves out of it. So Andrew Gennardis, who was a staffer like I was, we closed that loophole, right? We have to continue to fight for the political courage that we want to see. People talked about, the governor. Well, you're welcome. I helped.
Thank you.
I think that it's really important for us to operate from a place of political courage and continue to, because that's what we need. We have a majority in the Senate. We have a majority in the House. We have a Democrat for president, but without political courage, we will not be able to move things forward. And I need all of you to give me the blessing to be able to continue to serve all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Carlina Rivera. Thank you. Thank you, Yuh-Line Niou. Carlina Rivera.
When my mother came here from Puerto Rico, I'm a proud Puerto Rican woman. She landed in Brooklyn. And I will tell you, my dad, she grew up in a public housing development called Farragut Houses, and my dad grew up in Seward Park Extension in the LES. So I like to say I'm the best of both boroughs. I will tell you that my experiences, Section 8 vouchers, access to contraception at the local Planned Parenthood, I'm not talking about how I'm going to save it. I've lived it. These are my personal experiences. I am a fighter. I always have been. I went to my first tenant association meeting when I was a kid. I joined my local community board where I met my husband, no less. That's not where you go to meet your partner. I got lucky. But I am someone who will continue to fight and who has a record of delivering for the communities in NY10 and beyond. I am very, very proud of my legislative record and what I've been able to do in coalition building and ensuring that we are building a future where everyone can see themselves in, whether they are a lifelong New Yorker or someone new to this city. I will take my hustle and my work ethic, and I will take it to Washington and make you all proud. And that is why I have the endorsements of Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, council members, Lincoln Ressler, Eric Botcher, Alexa Viles, Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso, the healthcare workers 1199, other union leaders, and unparalleled community support across the district. Thank you very much. I would be honored to be your Congresswoman and represent NY10 with home ground pride.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlina Rivera. Dan Goldman takes us home here.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you all. It is easy to identify the problems that we're facing. And I think we've all identified a number of issues and a number of problems. It is a lot more difficult to come up with solutions and to actually achieve results. And there's one of us on this stage that has actually achieved results in Washington, and that's me. I led the impeachment investigation of Donald Trump, and we proved our case. And we did it through creativity. Now, there's one threat that we are dealing with above all other threats, and it's one that we've never dealt with before. And that is a legitimate and serious threat to our actual democratic way of life. This is no exaggeration. Donald Trump and his Republican Party are laying the foundation to steal the next election. And we need leaders with the strength, the courage, and the experience in Washington to stand up to Trump and his Republican Party to defend and protect our democracy. I have done it before, and I will do it again. I thank you all for having me, and I would love for you all to join our campaign, which had more than 2,100 contributions in the month of June alone, as we build this movement to get us to Washington, D.C. and to represent all of you in this district.
Thank you, Dan Goldman. Thank you, everybody, for coming out and sweating with us tonight. Thank you for being here. Have a good night.